Hi, and welcome back to my take on China. Today, I'm going to just talk a little bit about war and why I think it's very unlikely that there will be a war in China or with China between any countries at all. But first of all, to put it into context, I need to go back a little bit, and we're going to talk for a moment about the Ukrainian situation and go back more than a few years to a person called John Mearsheimer. John Mearsheimer is a world-renowned geopolitical analyst who stated in an article in 2014 and a speech called "The Liberal Delusions That Provoked Putin" that the blame for the Ukrainian crisis rests squarely at the feet of the US and EU policy for the region. Now, the article obviously wasn't about the current invasion, but it did accurately predict Russian aggression. Mearsheimer posited how Putin would react after NATO, giving commitments that it would not expand into the region, appeared to do so. It's worth noting, at no time in this administration or the last has the US government or NATO ever publicly stated that Ukraine will not join NATO. At the same time, NATO countries' weapons, equipment, training, and military support have all been given to Ukraine. Ukraine's a country that was crossed by both Hitler and Napoleon's armies, and that resulted in the deaths of millions of Russians. Millions of Germans and French too, but it was millions of Russians who died protecting their own country. Realist that he is, Mearsheimer suggested that the US and its allies should abandon their plans to westernize Ukraine and instead aim to make it a neutral buffer. Had they listened to him and done so back in 2014 when he said that, there would be no war now. Mearsheimer also predicted in 2010 something that I think is chillingly unthinkable: a war with China. He described the rise of China as a gathering storm, leading to inevitable conflict. Fortunately, and for a variety of reasons, he was incorrect. First and foremost, because a war with China would lack the support of the Asian countries. None of the most populated and powerful countries of the region, India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Malaysia, or Indonesia, will join, in the same way that they aren't standing behind the US and NATO in Ukraine now. Many parts of Mearsheimer's analysis, however, are correct. He accurately described China's military buildup and economic growth, but then just as firmly suggested that China is not interested in exporting its ideological model to any other countries. He went on to explain China's military growth. It's defensive, not offensive. And this is borne out by the fact that in the intervening years, China has built more tonnage of ships than the USA and deployed more of these ships into Chinese waters. Experts point out that these ships are not blue water ships, but frigates and corvettes, designed for local home waters, if you like. Furthermore, according to the Institute for Strategic Studies, they aren't building amphibious assault or amphibious landing vessels either, which renders an invasion of Taiwan quite unlikely. And that is something that many so-called experts seem to think will be the catalyst for a war. So if he's usually correct in his assessments and predictions, what makes this brilliant man wrong this time? And the answer is that he isn't a psychologist and doesn't understand Chinese culture. Just like Western scholars and experts everywhere, he views Asian policies through a Western lens. For example, he suggested more than 12 years ago that China might, if requested by Iran, post troops inside of their borders for regional security. Now, this is something the US does in many countries. China hasn't, nor does it have any history of doing so, without a mandate from the United Nations to operate as peacekeepers, where, funnily enough, China makes the world's largest contribution in terms of personnel and financial support. They also offer humanitarian support through hospital ships. There are 11 of them, and they have been widely deployed. Chinese military are not traveling to other countries as combatants, and they haven't done so in more than a generation. Mearsheimer also suggested that although China didn't have the capacity to invade Australia, this couldn't be ruled out in the future, as China will need resources. This is again something the US has done and still does, but there's no record in 70 years since the People's Republic of China was formed, or even any time in the history of China, of the country considering an invasion for these reasons. And, just for the record, China still has not developed the capacity to invade Australia, and it's been more than 12 years since it was suggested they might. Trade between those two countries grows and continues to grow peacefully to record levels. There was a very minor 3% reduction in 2020, but obviously that was COVID related. China is a manufacturing and trading nation. It imports resources and it exports goods, and it also sells domestically too. Wars don't help imports. They certainly won't help manufacturing or exports. So it isn't in the interest of any aspect of China's development. Furthermore, China doesn't have religion or God to fight for to justify wars. Nor has China ever attempted to impose its political ideology or its system of governance on any other country. And we're all well aware that some countries do want to export their system, but there's no evidence China does. Mearsheimer's predictions are based on the understanding that China is just like the USA, which is why, in his opinion, China is likely to imitate the USA and become a regional hegemon. In his speech back in 2010, Mearsheimer asked some rhetoric questions, but I'm going to answer them here. Yes, China are more principled than Americans. This comes from a long history and a very traditional culture. No, they are no less nationalistic, but the Chinese sense of national pride is of China's modern achievements: wealth, poverty alleviation, infrastructural growth, improvements in health, safety, security, and lifestyle. And yes, they are very proud of the People's Liberation Army, but not for its military strength, because they are of the people, for the people, and will fight to protect and secure the people. Chinese people are no less concerned about their own survival than the United States citizens, which is why they've put massive infrastructure investments into health, education, communications, transportation, and it's why foreign investment is sought, as well as diversification and expansion through the Belt and Road Initiative. These are all very important, much more so than any military intervention. We Westerners would do well to remember this one major point. Just because a course of action is something that we would do, it doesn't mean it will be done by China. We're not the same. And that's why so many people get it so wrong. We're not the same.